period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Yesterday, the Premier said that removing the member for Cutknife Turtleford was, quote, a difficult decision. Was it, Mr. Speaker? Was it really a difficult decision for that Premier to eject a member of his caucus who was charged in a human trafficking operation?
Recognize the Premier.
Difficult news to accept when I learned of this Friday, Mr. Speaker. It's a difficult decision of which I made very quickly, Mr. Speaker, and I would say that equally difficult decision to make here today with a member of her caucus, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask the Leader of the Opposition does she agree with her member, her extremist member, Mr. Speaker, when she says that Israel is guilty of genocide.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
It really shouldn't have been a difficult decision. Yesterday, I asked the Premier about his government's record on protecting women in this province and what message it sends that a member of the Sask Party caucus was caught in a human trafficking sting operation. To recap, a member of his caucus was charged with a serious sexual criminal offence, and the Premier compared that to a 40-minute disruption of this question period. Does the Premier, does he actually believe that those are two equally serious offences?
Roll the tape.
Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, there is no comparison to be made. Mr. Speaker, I had made decisions very quickly on learning of last week's events, Mr. Speaker. Those decisions, I think, were quickly made. They were harsh, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition, I think, has some decisions to make of her own, Mr. Speaker. But when it comes to supporting women in our province, Mr. Speaker, there's been unprecedented supports by this government, totaling just under $30 million each and every year in second-stage housing, not only capital investments, Mr. Speaker, but in operational investments as well, Mr. Speaker, which were called for, in fairness, by that side, Mr. Speaker, which were delivered by the government of the day. A number of additional investments, Mr. Speaker, as well as, I believe, first reading just as recently as yesterday on amendments coming to the Human Trafficking Act, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that most certainly supports women, in particular those women that are in their most vulnerable state, Mr. Speaker, and we are going to continue to do so, Mr. Speaker. There are times when leaders are faced with decisions that you might not otherwise want to be faced with, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition is facing one of those right now. And I'd ask her again, does she agree with her extremist MLA, Mr. Speaker, her extremist member of caucus, when that member says that Israel is guilty of genocide?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'll remind the Premier that it took him 5 full days to find his feet and denounce the invitation of a convicted wife killer to this Assembly. Now, Mr. Speaker, clearly, it wasn't appropriate for proceedings to be disrupted on Monday, but there's simply no comparison between a government MLA being charged with a serious criminal offence and a 40-minute disruption of this Assembly. Now, how does the Premier justify comparing protest in this legislature to the serious criminal charges against one of his members?
It's a little different.
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
What the Leader of the Opposition is failing to recognize is it's not a comparison of the incident, it's a comparison of leadership skills. That's what we're discussing here, quite frankly. Which leader will take action when there is questionable actions by one of their members? I remember being in this House, and the NDP were government, Mr. Speaker, and I think there was a couple of others that were here at that time, and they had a very high-profile gentleman by the name of Murdoch Carrier, who was accused by not one, but several women for harassment in the workplace. And you know what the NDP government did at that time? They did not take swift, decisive action. They covered it up, Mr. Speaker. They covered it up, and finally, when it became too much for them, they severed it with severance. He got paid for harassing women, Mr. Speaker. So we are talking about leadership and the strength of leaders.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I will compare my record to that of the Premier any day of the week. Mr. Speaker, this, and again, clearly tired and out of touch government is so desperate to change the channel from their scandal and mismanagement that they're reaching back decades. Now, to distract, let's be clear, from a member of their caucus being charged in a human trafficking investigation, and also to distract from serious questions about the Sunrise Motel. Mr. Speaker, we're joined again today by Evelyn Harper. She saw the rate at the Sunrise Motel jump more than 50% when the public started paying the bill. She wants answers, and she's not the only one. Will the Premier call in the provincial auditor to investigate how the ministry pays for these hotel bills?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see Ms. Harper here. Once again, had a meeting with her last time she was here and had a brief conversation with her just before the House. And I'm also glad the Sask Housing Corporation worked very hard in concert with the ministry, was able to find an appropriate location for her and her family in this case. Mr. Speaker, some of the same policies as under the NDP, the ministry, when they find a client who needs help. I would also note that Ms. Harper checked herself in, and the ministry became involved after that point, Mr. Speaker, when we learned of her case. But again, the ministry works to try to get the best rate available. There are, of course, various factors that go into this, Mr. Speaker. I have asked officials again, as I said yesterday, to review the policies and processes that the ministry has in terms of finding a balance between taxpayer dollars and keeping people safe in potentially in tough situations. Thank you.